Welcome to Global Business, part of the Peter Day's World of Business podcast. This week, Peter looks into a fairly new industry that is sucking up huge amounts of people's time and money.
Hello and welcome to Global Business. And let's play a game. Lots of games, actually. Computer games on consoles, laptops, desktops, tablets, mobile phones. For years, the video games industry has been bigger than Hollywood. At first it seemed as though that might just be a passing fad. But as the internet worms its way into every aspect of everyday life, and smartphones find their way into millions of pockets, computer games seem to be growing in power and influence. I've been finding out how and why. The sound of just two of the biggest hits of recent years, Farmville from San Francisco and Angry Birds from Finland. And music from a much less well-known campaigning game. It won an award from a journalism foundation. We'll hear from the people behind those eye-catching games, but why is all this activity happening now? Adrian Hon is a British game developer at the company Six to Start.
Hundreds of millions of people now have devices in their pockets all the time with which they can play quite sophisticated games. And previously, a lot of people may or may not have wanted to play games, but they didn't have the technology to do so.
Computer games companies seem to be able to come from nowhere at the speed of light, and one whose success is remarkable even in this fast-changing world is Rovio, based in Finland, the home of the mobile phone giant Nokia. Finns seem to have a special affinity with mobile phones and their uses, and Rovio makes Angry Birds. It's a runaway mobile phone success with more than 1 billion downloads. Think about that number for a moment. Rovio's chief executive is Mikael Hed, and I met him at the Ernst & Young Entrepreneur of the Year Awards in Monte Carlo. He was last year's Finnish winner. I wanted to know whether Mikael Hed was much of a gamer.
I've been playing games for pretty much all my life.
Some of the games companies I know have been formed by games players in their teens who go straight into it. They stay in the bedroom and go on to build businesses straight from that. You weren't like that. You got degrees and things.
I have one business degree, actually, and I also do have work experience from other things than games as well. I've had companies in Finland doing book publishing, comic books. I also have a construction company, of all things. Also, my experience with my father's software company was very important.
How did you come kind of to go full circle, to go back to the computer gaming you did when you were much younger?
My cousin, Niklas, was a student at Helsinki University of Technology, and he participated in a competition to make a game. He won the competition, started a company, and then right at that time I was coming back to Finland. I was looking for work opportunities, and the chance to work in the games business was just such a fascinating thought that I wanted to go there, even though the prospects of making a profitable business were a bit bleak. We were in the mobile gaming sector, and it was back in early 2004. It wasn't an easy business to make money. Essentially, the sales channels were the telephone operators, and they decided which games would go on to their sales decks and what the top 10 list would look like. And it was hard to support all the handsets that customers had. And so it was expensive to be in the business, and the revenues were a bit meager because the sales volumes were low as well.
So the last 10 years is essentially the development of a new medium. This is the thing that's happened, is it?
Right. So a couple of things have happened. With the iPhone, the device itself is very powerful and a good portable entertainment device. But I think the biggest change with the iPhone was the change of the business model. So now suddenly it's possible for any developer to submit their game onto the store and have an immediate global distribution of their game. And the rankings of the games are decided by their popularity. And so it's a totally different model from what it used to be.
The irritatingly catchy theme tune of Angry Birds, a runaway success due mostly to the Apple iPhone and the App Store, until Angry Birds was sold on the application store in 2010, Rovio was a games company without, apparently, much of a future. And then things changed fast.
Angry Birds came about as a mix of us really questioning everything we knew about making games and what a good game feels and looks like. And we had done already more than 50 games before we did Angry Birds. So we had that science part of it. But really the art of making games came when we saw these bird characters designed by our game designer Jaakko Iisalo.
You were kind of building on the potential that was innate in the drawing he'd made, or they were amusing and engaging even on the page, even on the screen, were they?
Just seeing one image of those birds was enough to make us feel like, okay, well, we want to know more about these birds. We want to know what they're like and why they're angry, and that really was a great inspirational moment for all of us.
This was the starting point, these birds with potential, and that's the reason that this is so sticky, because most applications sold on the App Store or given away have a half-life of about 3 weeks or something, don't they?
We recognized this when we released Angry Birds, and we were doing our best to create the conditions that would allow it to stay on top of the charts for longer than the average game. And also we wanted to find ways to keep the brand fresh and new for as long as possible. And really the ambition from very early on was to create an evergreen brand.
It's eye-grabbing and experience-grabbing to start off with, but keeping it going. Do you keep adding features all the time, so there's always something new to come back to?
More than adding features is about what features do you leave out. In Angry Birds we've succeeded quite well in keeping it very, very simple. There are a million things we could have done with it. We worked very hard to keep the game super approachable. We do add content. We have seasonal content. We did a space version where we collaborated with NASA. Also, it is very important that we do have the animations, comics, and the merchandise to support the brand.
Angry Birds sells for 99 US cents. That's if you buy it. There's also a free version that the company gives away. This is the economics of the Internet.
You can find both paid versions of the game and advertising-funded versions of the game, even free versions that are the kind of trial versions of the game.
1 billion downloads means you're an example of a software company that, starting from quite a simple and straightforward base, has a global audience from almost day one.
It's true, and that's really what's changing the whole media industry. It's remarkable how far you can go with so little to start with. In our case, we have created one of the most popular entertainment brands in the world, starting with 12 people and almost no capital at all. Last year we had revenues of some $106 million. We have some 400 employees now. If you look at the statistics, I would say that Angry Birds has far surpassed our expectations that we had early in 2009.
5 years' time, Angry Birds will presumably be just one part of the portfolio. We don't know, do we? We don't know how this platform is going to develop. Gaming could go off in a completely new direction.
Yes. And that's also why we're not only in gaming. We have built an entertainment company that does many other things besides gaming, and we believe that there's no reason why Angry Birds wouldn't be very popular for decades.
Mikael Hed of the Finnish company Rovio. Now let's go to another significant games-producing country, Britain, where the developers Six to Start adopted a name harking back to the number that board game players have to roll on the dice before they're able to begin the game. Like Rovio in Finland, this is also something of a family business. Two brothers initially making games based on popular TV programs for television companies to sell under their own label. Now, Six to Start is branching out into its own titles. I heard from the founder, Adrian Hon, along with one of the company's games writers, Naomi Alderman. Adrian Hon speaks first.
We were founded about 5 years ago between myself and my brother. Before that, I worked at a company called Mind Candy, which many people will know for making a game called Moshi Monsters, a kids' game.
We're now seeing a migration to different machines and a migration of the ideas and the concepts and how you play it and what it's about.
Games are obviously becoming much more social now. But I think one of the biggest changes is simply that hundreds of millions of people now have devices in their pockets all the time with which they can play quite sophisticated games. And previously, a lot of people may or may not have wanted to play games, but they didn't have the technology to do so.
And you've got a lot of computer power, Naomi, haven't you?
Well, we certainly do. I mean, if you're talking about games that you remember playing in the early 90s, you're carrying around so much more processing power than that.
Well, it was
with you in
basically
your
a sort
pocket.
of noughts and crosses or somebody jumping over barriers and smashing into a wall or something. And it was black and white too, wasn't it?
The kind of thing that was cutting edge 15 years ago, you can play right now on whatever smartphone you have.
This was just part of a much longer conversation, so next week on the programme, Adrian Hon and Naomi Alderman will be back to talk about how they created a game that combines zombies and physical exercise. Yes, physical exercise, about the current state of the games and publishing industries, and quite a lot more. This is Global Business from the BBC. I'm Peter Day, this week trying to get to grips with something I don't understand at all, computer games, a huge industry. And if, like me, you're missing the game's gene, you might think computer games are all about shooting or smashing bricks, activities the early games seemed to concentrate on years ago. Those are things that don't hold much interest for Paolo Pedercini. Originally from Italy, he's now a lecturer at Carnegie Mellon University in Pittsburgh in the USA. He's also the founder of the games developer Mole Industria, using his games designing skills in a politically aware way.
When I started in 2003, 2004 in Italy, I was into politics and media activism. At that point, video games were the only cultural field missing any alternative voices. In other fields, you have underground comics, you have socially engaged films, sure, but games only reflected basically the dominant values.
Then you started building games that were what?
They are basically games dealing with social issues, ranging from labor issues to religion to economics and environment. One of the strategies that I use is I generally tend to put the player in unusual roles and situations. So the players get to play very awkward or problematic roles.
The opening scene of the game Unmanned, in which the hero or anti-hero wakes up from a nightmare to go to his job on an American base, piloting a drone above the skies of Afghanistan. This isn't, however, a shoot-'em-up game. The character is put through such mundane tasks as shaving, singing along to the radio, and chatting to a co-worker. Seemingly boring, but also strangely compelling, Unmanned won a prize sponsored by the Knight Foundation for Journalism at the recent Games for Change Awards. The judges said the game subtly confronts players with 21st century warfare.
I think games are particularly good at portraying complex systems. Games themselves are systems of rules. Two of my most popular games actually put you in the shoes of a CEO of corporations. Your goal is to maximize profits, obviously, but in order to do so, you might choose some unethical practices, and you're confronted with all the negative externalities of your industrial process.
You started a mobile phone game. What's it called?
It's called Phone Story, which is basically an anti-smartphone game for smartphones. I just realized that even in my own field, the field of digital games, which is supposedly immaterial, we are dealing with information, we are dealing with zero and ones, but it actually has a very material side because it relies on cheap hardware, basically. The game basically starts to tell you the story of the very device that you are holding. Where does it come from? So in the first level, you have this scene set in Congo where there's minerals, coltan, that is present in all the electronic devices. That's where most of the coltan is mined from, and you have prisoners of war that are enslaved, often children, and they are mining this material that gets into our phone. In the second level, you have a representation of the issue with Foxconn, the big assembly factory in China, where there was a wave of suicides, and so you're trying to prevent frustrated, burnt-out workers to jump out of the window. And then in the final scene, you have to deal with the end of the cycle. So you have to deal with electronic waste.
Hello, consumer. Thank you for joining us. Let me tell you the story of this phone while I provide you with quality entertainment.
You produce this game and then you want to make it available to sell it, so you get it in the App Store.
Yeah, we put it in the Apple Store, and strangely, it passed because it was functional. There was nothing so outrageous. But a few hours after it was approved, they basically realized that it was kind of a media stunt, and they pulled it from the market.
What do you make of that?
Well, banning resulted in a kind of like a widespread kind of controversy and a scandal. Like a lot of people started to discuss. People are like looking for more information. Like, what was this game that was so outrageous to be banned? I'd rather have it available in the Apple Store, but in a way, it kind of expanded the discourse. It's not just about the production process, but also about what runs into these devices. And so it became more about kind of like market censorship, or what you can run and can you not run on your device.
So it's still available, the game, isn't it? I can still buy it.
It's available on Android. They have a loser policy, so like for Android devices is still available and actually quite successful. It's available online, but yeah, it's not available for Apple devices.
The issue of editorial control going on here, a big corporation with an app store which has become quite an important dynamic in the formation of little new businesses, hasn't it? Also uses its power to say yes and no to the things that are on sale there.
The main problem to me is that Apple, in their own guidelines, are basically dismissing the concept of app as a cultural product. So they're basically saying, this is not like music, this is not like books. Apps are meant to be more like screwdrivers. And it's kind of problematic when you get into games. Games can be much more than screwdrivers.
Paolo Pedercini, developer of Phone Story and other politically charged games. And we asked Apple about Phone Story, but the company didn't want to comment. Now, the almost instant success of some computer games can make them a roller coaster ride of a business. Zynga, based in San Francisco, is a good example. Last year, Zynga, devising games mostly running on the huge social network website Facebook, was valued at $1 billion after it sold some of its stock in an initial public offering. But now Zynga's share price has tumbled to less than half its flotation value, and it fell sharply again only the other day when the company warned about falling profits. Shares in Facebook have also been under pressure as investors worry about the sustainability of these virally popular social business models. Zynga's Vice President of Product is Sean Kelly.
We've certainly had a great deal of success on Facebook, and the idea of having games within Facebook that you could use as another way of connecting to people that you were adding to your list of friends was really a fantastic way of proving out our philosophy that play is really a form of connection between people. It doesn't have to be a solo experience and doesn't just have to be about my interest in play. It's my interest in having a relationship with somebody that I care about, and games are a terrific way to do that.
Tell me about Farmville, because that's the one that a lot of people know about.
It started in 2009 with a game that we really thought would allow people to have an investment in something that was totally unlike a traditional game. And a farm, obviously, is not what would jump into your head when you first hear about a video game. But what it allowed you to do is create something that was unique to you. You could plant your crops and put your animals and your buildings to run your farm anywhere you wanted. And we had this concept that people would visit each other's farms, and in so doing, you'd be able to provide gifts. I could give you animals you could raise. I could even help you grow your crops. That experience of playing around a shared game board was what really made it a spectacular experience and caused it to grow an incredible amount. So at one point, I think 30 million people every day were growing crops on farms and raising animals and connecting to each other.
A sort of virtual reconstruction of 19th century America.
Well, I think it does harken back to sort of a simpler time, and because the game wasn't trying to be high-tech or futuristic, it really felt very warm and inviting to a whole audience of people who were not the traditional games audience. Our way of combining both the traditional techniques of video games and the high degree of social that we bring to every game was really the magic formula for us.
That formula spawned a number of spin-offs, so Zynga has games like Cityville and Frontierville, variations on a theme. But it's not necessarily easy to turn yesterday's Facebook game on a fairly big computer screen into tomorrow's game on the mobile phone with a tiny display.
People don't really consider this when they look at their phone, but your phone's screen is usually about the size of a business card compared to a monitor that you would use or a laptop computer. That's a tiny amount of screen real estate with which to show an experience. So the design of the game has to take that into account and really differentiated from anything that you would see on a larger screen.
And you want to do games that swap between all the mediums, don't you?
That's true, although it doesn't mean that we want to have the same game on every type of screen. And I think the real magic of the kind of smartphones that we see exploding today is in the relationship to the phone through touch. Designing for touch and the ability to sort of tap through the glass and manipulate your game or your content through your finger directly on the glass has really transformed what kind of games that we can make and has resulted in some really, really great experiences that are totally different than what you see on the PC.
So the brain and the feelings are engaged in different ways, and it may come back to a hugely visual experience when we get spectacles on which the game is projected in high definition, when we'll be totally immersed in a visual world again.
That's right. My background actually comes from the virtual worlds industry. It was very nascent in the 90s when I started working on virtual worlds, and I think that will cycle back around as the quality and fidelity of what you can see on devices, even as small as a pair of eyeglasses, increases, although we feel like the phone is really, right now, such an enormous opportunity that fully hasn't been utilized yet.
How does this work as a money-making business?
Our games are free to play, and we monetize in two different ways. We sell virtual currencies, which allow you to accelerate your gameplay. So the game is free to play, but if you want to go faster or get a special item, you can do that. And the other way that we do it is we provide advertising that our users will interact with as they're playing the game.
And that spending to buy virtual coinage or virtual money means I can, grow my farm bigger or buy more animals or fertilizer, those sort of details.
That's right.
Now, to a non-games player, this is a great mystery. Enough people are compelled to want to get ahead that they are compelled to buy stuff from you, are they? It actually works.
Yeah, and it's a really incredible business model because the user can experience the full extent of the game without having to purchase anything. So that decision that you have to make in a traditional store where you go and you look at a shelf full of different games and decide what you want to spend your money on, that can be very daunting. And our games are designed to be as completely frictionless as possible to get you into that experience and get you connecting with your friends.
In November of last year, Zynga went public, thereby opening itself to the scrutiny of stock market investors, and it hasn't so far done very well. For a games company, there is one clear imperative: to develop almost instant new hits over and over again. I asked Sean Kelly how the company comes up with new ideas.
We will look at popular genres and things that we think can be made social. So what we really look for is a concept or an idea that when we say it, like Farmville or Cityville, that you have an idea in your head of what that game might be like, and you're interested in it because, it's a broad and appealing theme. But the real magic is in how you take that theme and actually create gameplay around it. And that's something we do very carefully.
Critics say you pinch a lot of ideas from other people, other small games developers.
We want to go where our players want us to go, and if there's a genre that we think is very appealing, we will certainly not be shy about putting a game in that genre, but we are very respectful of intellectual property and code and artwork, and we certainly see people taking as many ideas from us as we might take from the industry as a whole.
Zynga stock, the shares have plunged since they were floated late last year, haven't they? Because people are worried about how long-term you are and follow the figures for for people playing so closely. That must be worrying to the company.
I don't think we focus on that at all. In fact, what we are focused on is enriching people's relationships through games. And every time that I'm in front of a group of people, wherever it is, I always ask them how many people play our games. And typically about half or more of the hands go up when I say, hey, are you playing a Zynga game? Half of the room is a great business, and the other half of the room is a great opportunity.
Even though the medium is changing so rapidly and the rise of the mobile phone is a different experience from the one that you first had your success with, for example.
We have an incredible network of mobile players already. I think it's more than 21 people every day play a Zynga game on mobile.
21 million, I think.
That's right. And we really feel like that's just the beginning for us. I mean, the amount of smartphones that are available in the world is growing exponentially, and all we see as the opportunity is growth ahead of us.
These questions from me are a little bit incomprehending because I simply don't have a games mentality. I don't want to play games. I don't even want to do things that are very social. So I'm slightly baffled by the whole phenomenon, but I may be in a very small minority.
Well, you're a challenging customer, but we welcome the opportunity to get you to play one of our games.
Sean Kelly at the internet games company Zynga. And after huge successes, the company is now trying to revive its fortunes. Games, people say, are one of the hallmarks of a developing civilization, and of course they go back to primitive times. So next week I'll be taking a rather more philosophical view of this huge new entertainment industry with two of the British Games devisers who are thinking hard about what they're doing and why.
Peter Day. The programme was produced by Mike Wendling.